Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, thanks for tuning in again today, and it's good to have you on the SQL Trail.
This is episode number 118. Carlos?
Compañeros, thanks for tuning in again today, and it's good to have you on the SQL Trail.
This is episode number 118, and today's topic is index maintenance. How are you doing today, Carlos?
I am well, thanks, Steve. And today we're lucky enough to have Sean McCown back with us on the show after a bit of a hiatus, and so it'll be good to talk with Sean again.
Yep, Sean's always one of those interesting guests. I know I've learned a lot having him on the show and listening to him.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you can't be afraid to kind of stake an opinion and then have him, give some feedback on it. So and today's episode is no different. And so that idea of how index maintenance is changing, right? Obviously, he has some pretty strong feelings about it. And so it'll be good to have that conversation.
Yep. And before we get into the episode, though, do we have any compañero shout-outs?
We do have a couple, Steve. First, we want to give one to Robbie Staples. Robbie attended the local user group actually here in Richmond. I happened to present that and then followed up on Twitter talking a bit about the conversation. Very similar to our podcast, I like to keep my presentations very conversational, and he appreciated that idea.
Okay, nice.
The other one is from Douglas Kemp. Now, Douglas reached out a little while ago, and so we're kind of, I think we mentioned him earlier, and if we didn't, I apologize, Douglas, for not. But he asked, and he noticed, and some of you compañeros may have noticed as well, that, gosh, it's probably been 25 episodes or so now, but we used to do a performance tips section, and he kind of asked where that had gone. And then he suggested, well, hey, have you thought about having a tips and tricks portion to the show?
Right. What's interesting about that is like tips and tricks with SSMS or things like that. I mean, I always, when I'm doing a demo, people sometimes come up to me and ask me questions about things I did in SS, just that are simplify things that people may not always know.
That's right. So we've been thinking about this for a little bit. And while we're very interested in doing this segment, at the end of the day, and I guess I'm going to go back and use my Alan White speech here, we all have something that we can teach each other or share with each other. And so while obviously we have some tips and tricks that we'd like to put together, compañeros, we'd like to hear from you. And so we're going to be collecting this. We'll collect them forever, but we won't start with this segment until January.
So then between now and January, if our listeners can send in their favorite thing, their tip or trick in SSMS or SQL Server or whatever it is that's part of the whole SQL infrastructure here, send it to us and we'll include it on the show. And there's a couple of ways they can send it to us.
That's right. So at SQLDataPartners.com/podcast, you can either leave a comment, right?
They can send it to us.
That's right. So at SQLDataPartners.com/podcast, you can either leave a comment, right, on the main page there, or there is that option to record using your own voice. You may have to practice a couple of times. And don't worry, right? Everybody has to kind of get used to that idea of hearing your own voice. I can't remember if it allows you to play it back or not, but don't worry about it. It doesn't sound as awful as you think it does. But if you want to go ahead and submit that, you can record that audio and get it over to us. We'll take those, we'll review them, and then we'll put them up on the air.
We'll put them on the air unless you specifically ask to not have your voice on the air.
There you go. That's right.
We will certainly honor that. So
obviously.
Yep.
Yeah. So we'd love to hear from you. We think that there's going to be a lot better, that's going to be a better segment if everyone participates. And so we'd love to get your thoughts on the subject. And again, these are going to be very, very small things. These are going to be the dumb little things that you think nobody else does. And there is on the why or on the use cases, right? maybe you don't do that certain tip or trick every single time, but under this specific use scenario, it's very, very helpful. Those are other things that we're looking for there. So.
Yep. All right. Well, we kind of got off track from our whole Compañero shout out there, but we've got a couple more of those to hit on, don't we?
We do. And so actually, Steve, you want to tell us about Courtney?
Yeah. So I got a LinkedIn request from Courtney Messam from Toronto. And he said, I'm a big fan of your podcast and have just downloaded the Health Monitor tool. It looks awesome. Continue the good work. One of your podcasts you did spoke about updating your resume on LinkedIn. And I haven't done that for 8 years now. And I'm trying to do that. So thank you, guys.
Yeah. So thank you, Courtney. And like you, we're big fans of the podcast as well. So
yes. And I hope you're enjoying Database Health Monitor too.
That's right. Last shout out to Bob Minigue.
Yes. And I hope you're enjoying Database Health Monitor too.
That's right. Last shout out to Bob Minigue. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, Bob, and I apologize if I'm not. He connected after Past Summit, attended actually, I think he's attended both of our sessions and said that he enjoyed them and connected on LinkedIn. And so we chatted for a little bit. And so we appreciate, Bob, you reaching out to us and saying hello.
Yep. Always good to connect with listeners.
That's right. And the only downside that I had to that is I didn't remember meeting Bob. I don't think we had the actual opportunity to shake hands. And so I'm hoping to do that at some future SQL Trail event, potentially.
Yep. However, we do have to point out that at Past Summit and events like that, sometimes the crowd of people after a presentation can become a bit of a blur. So
exactly.
Shake hands. Apologies there, Bob.
That's right. And so with that, I think it's time for a little SQL Server in the news.
The Past Summit, the SQL Operations Studio.
That's exactly right. So this was announced. And so when they actually announced it, they didn't have it yet available. It wasn't available for preview. This just came out last week. And so it is in preview, and folks are able to download that now. And so this is, and it's kind of interesting, I think, with just the multiple teams and the different flavors of SQL Server that are now available. Obviously, with Linux, they now have a different operating system that they have to deal with. And so how are administrators or those responsible for those databases going to try to connect to them? And that's what Operations Studio is trying to solve, that problem. And so it's kind of like a lightweight SSMS, right? It will run on different operating systems, and it will allow you to connect to the database and do some of those database type things. So it's a little bit more, I believe, at least in the future, it's going to allow you to do a bit more Management Studio.
Right. However, SQL Server Management Studio has become quite bloated if you see how long it takes to download and install these days.
That's right.
So having a lightweight version of that to be able to do some of what you need to do may be very nice on some servers.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what's interesting, I was talking with Kevin, who's one of the program managers on this, on the team there at Summit, and he actually mentions in the studio they give you the ability. So very similar. So if you're familiar with, and this is almost going to turn into a tips and tricks segment in a sense, but so in SQL Server Management Studio, you can run reporting services reports in there, right? So in theory, you could develop your own RDL, import it in, and run that query. Well, Operations Studio is going to have something very similar where, we all have our DMVs or the queries that we run. Well, now with the Operations Studio, that's basically going to be the visual layer. So you can, with the Operations Studio, that's basically going to be the visual layer. So you can then run the query and have a visual interface. And there are some options as far as what kind of graph you want. And obviously right now it's very, very basic, but that's the idea of what they're going to, allow you to do. So,
well, I'm just wondering how long until Power BI becomes part of it.
Yes. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me right before that, or even, again, being able to embed some of those things in there, right? It wouldn't surprise me at all, right? So, okay, the URL for today's episode is at SQLDataPartners.com/index maintenance. And I apologize. I know that's kind of a long URL, but that's the best I could come up with.
Well, if you don't like the long URL, you can get it at SQLDataPartners.com/118.
Let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Sean then. So Sean, So, Sean, it has been a little while. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, guys. It has been a while, but not that long. I'm still getting people talking to me about the last episode I was on.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I get a lot of people at SQL Sets and whatnot telling me how much they listen to you guys, and they heard about me and the stuff I'm doing through you guys. So, yeah, good for y'all. I didn't realize y'all were so popular.
Well, it's always good to have you on the show, and I think that helps with the popularity.
Aww.
That's right. Our MVP guest. Yeah, it's it's been, I guess 20 episodes. Episode 90 was the last time we had you on.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Talking about check DBCC. So, yeah, it's good to have you back on, and always trying to keep up with what you're doing. So today, ultimately, our topic is going to be a bit about reindexing.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Kind of, what's in store for that. It's kind of one of those. I think everybody has a story about reindexing or an opinion about reindexing. What's changing on the reindexing front?
Wow. So, well, first I wanted to say we've been watching a lot of Voyager recently.
Okay.
So I want to say your opinions about reindexing are irrelevant.
Resistance is futile?
That's right. Well, because to me, it's like I see this a lot, right? Companies seem to take pride. Now, I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but it may have even been the one I went on last time. But I see companies do this a lot, but because you were talking about opinions, and you get these companies that brag about how busy they are. Our business is so slammed, we don't have time to do reindexing. We don't have time for maintenance. We are so slammed. While that's a cute soundbite, you can't really change the math of reindexing and maintenance, right? I mean, it's nice to think that you don't have time for it, but that's like saying you don't have time to take care of yourself, but you don't have time for it. But that's like saying you don't have time to take care of yourself, but you're going to have time for a heart attack.
Sure.
Right.
Well, no. So in that vein, I guess do you believe that is one of the reasons that people, an additional reason perhaps, that people are looking to the NoSQL world? Because now again, it's not to say there aren't indexes there. Right?
No.
But they definitely seem to be, I don't know, maybe second-class citizens, right?
Yeah, people are looking into the NoSQL world because of the hype,
Gotcha.
right? They're advertising, a gazillion transactions per hour, and it's so much easier, and it takes a lot less maintenance because it's got so much less overhead and all of that, and but now they're getting bitten in the ass by what? The fact that there are no keys on the table, so
right.
your RI isn't enforced and whatnot. So they're like, hey, but I've got corrupted data now. You have the fact that there are no keys on the table, so
right.
your RI isn't enforced and whatnot. So they're like, hey, but I've got corrupted data now. Oh, duh, you think so? Maybe you should add some of that overhead back in. And this stuff is here for a reason, right? I mean,
right.
NoSQL has its place.
Right.
There are some times when it just doesn't matter, when that integrity is a lot less important, or when you have a threshold for that sort of thing, right? For having some what we'll call logical corruption, right?
Right.
But and you need the speed more than you need to have absolutely everything line up. But most of the world needs some sort of integrity.
Right. You want some protection. Yep. You want some, some help in assisting with keeping your data if you want to keep it around, right?
Yeah. So NoSQL is really more hype than anything, if you ask me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I have on
that. I think jumping back then to sort of our business is so busy that we don't have time to do that. I think oftentimes I hear that and I see that, and quite often it comes down to sort of a misunderstanding of some of the fundamental maintenance items you need to do there. I see oftentimes like somebody will go through and do a complete rebuild of all of their indexes, and then right after that, they'll rebuild all their statistics.
I see, yes.
And they'll rebuild the statistics with like a 10% sampling or something like that, which, when you rebuild your indexes, your statistics get updated too. So you're actually being wasteful rebuilding the statistics right afterwards.
Yeah. And part of the problem is not with that, but with not having time to do maintenance is allowing business people to run the show. You get PMs and you get sales managers and you get VPs, right? You get C-level people, in there saying, right, we've got customers. We need to keep it online.
Well, in their defense, it's because they've tried probably to do, they haven't done it in 10 years. Then they try to rebuild it, and it hits them because the business is impacted in some way because it runs over, it's still running at noon, and nobody can get into the database. And so that's why they're like, oh, well, we'll never do that again. Right.
Right. Or they have a DBA and this kind of, this kind of merges into what you were saying. They have a DBA that just flat out doesn't know how to do maintenance
right.
well.
Well, and we've all been in that camp, right? So I guess I think I may have actually told this story last time we were on, right? I had been hired by a law firm to help with a conversion of a financial application. And that was like the flagship project that I had come on for. There were two DBAs. He was actually in London at the time. This was in Richmond, Virginia, where we were located. So he was in London helping with some office, and they were doing some converved and located. So he was in London helping with some office, and they were doing some conversion over there. And then we had the document management had been having problems. And so the decision had been so somehow somebody else, and so the DBA in London had talked about rebuilding the index. That's what had been approved, or reorging the index. That's what had been approved. And for some reason, we're talking, and and we decide we're going to rebuild the thing instead of reorging it.
Let me guess, on standard edition as well.
Yeah, on standard edition as well. Well, so the issue is not what you may think it was, right? So the issue is not locking everybody else out. The issue was we ran out of disk space.
Right.
So it started trying to rebuild, and because it creates that second copy, and there wasn't enough. We were both involved to facilitate both copies of the index, and that had already taken 2 hours or some such thing. An attorney had needed to get into the system to get this document, and they couldn't, and then we were waiting for it to roll back, and so that caused a big hoopla, right? And because we were not paying attention to what we were doing, we were all tired. It was like midnight when this was happening. We were both involved in our own projects, and we made a kind of a in the moment decision when that probably wasn't the best choice.
Right. So I had sort of I had a situation years ago with a big client who hadn't done maintenance ever. And they were being charged something like $40,000 a month on missed SLA fees from their customers.
Oh, wow.
And they were about to both close the site, and then the other sites were about to go to Oracle because keep up with their level of business.
Right.
Okay, sure, if you say so. And so I got involved, and they were 99% fragmented on almost every table in the database. And so I got their maintenance taken care of, and even did a little bit of scale out for them, put some indexes on different LUNs and whatnot, and told them, now we have to, and they were a true 24/7 shop. And I said, now we have to go down for 4 hours every Sunday to do maintenance. We have to do this. And he was like, I can't do that. I can't afford that time, blah, 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 blah. So, okay, fine. Right. So
what about the $40,000 a month? Yeah.
Right. So like a week later, Sunday, they decided to skip their maintenance. That following Tuesday, they had to pull an emergency downtime to do their maintenance because the database had gotten so slow. Now they had gotten a taste of the good life.
Right.
And the database had gotten so slow they could barely work. And this is the way they'd worked emergency. The following Sunday, they got ready to do their maintenance, and the plant manager said, we can't bring everything down. We can't do this. We've got to skip it. And the general manager said, stop. No. Take it down, do the maintenance every Sunday. Don't ever miss another one.
Right.
And so we made a believer out of him for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. Maybe we should pause here just for a second, because I'm thinking all of a sudden about Eduardo Cervantes, right? And some of our other developer friends who are listening. And I guess I feel like maybe we should just revisit or rehash some of these terms, right, that we're talking about. And so even, I guess, the idea of index fragmentation, right? So you mentioned 99%. So let's just take a couple of minutes and talk about the very beginning. So we have a table, right? If there's a primary key on it, you have the clustered index, and then obviously you have other non-clustered indexes. How do we go about getting fragmentation on our indexes?
Right. So my favorite analogy to this is with this. Right. So My favorite analogy to this is with the CD case, right?
Okay.
And it seems to be the one that everybody can associate with. So you've got a big.
You're showing your age a little bit there, Sean. Right?
I've got 4 CD books sitting over there.
Okay, for you millennials, right? We used to carry our music around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it wasn't all on our phone.
Yeah,
that's right. So let's say you got a nice big CD case with all your movies in it, right? Back before Amazon had it all digital, right? And so, and this is going to dovetail into fill factor as well, right?
Okay,
so
there you go.
You alphabetize all of your movies in there. So you've got them in a certain order, right? That, by the way, is your clustered index, right? All of the movies are physically in order in this book. And so let's say they come out with another Batman movie, right? Batman forgot his comb in Penguin's lair, right? Where you're having to put it, right? So you go to one of the pages at the end of the book, you put the Batman in there, right? And then you put a little Post-it note on the current B page that says, B's, continue on page, on page 75, right?
Right.
And so you get enough of those where you're having to put them in the back of the book and make different markers to different things. And that's fragmentation, where you don't have everything in order. You got to go here for part of it, then over here for part of it, then over there for part of it, because everything starts getting out of order because you haven't left room to put anything else in there, right?
Right.
So that's what we mean by a fragmented index.
Yep. And the effect of that being out of order is if you're trying to find that Batman movie or something else that starts with B, it's going to take you a lot longer to find it because you start in your B section and you have to flip to the back and jump around quite a bit more than if they were all in the expected location.
Absolutely. And if you put different letters on that same Batman page and then you got another B, well, then that would be way out of order too. And you're going to have to leave a Post-it note on that one to say where the next B section starts, right? I mean, it can get way out of hand.
Right.
However, if you were to say only if your CD book held 4 CDs a page and you were to only put in 2 CDs on each page, because you might get some more CDs, right? They might come out with another Batman movie. You know it, right? So on the first one, you only have the first 2 Batman movies on that page, and you've got 2 free when they come out with a new Batman movie. Then you can just slide it in there right past the last one you have, and you still got room for another Batman movie. Anything after that, and you're gonna have to put it on another page, right? So that's your fill factor as well. So you're leaving space for inserts, and then once it fills up, then you have to either start create 2 free per page and recreate it with that. So a good example of that would be, they come out with 2 more Batman movies and your page is full. Then they come out with another one. Well, now you have to tear your CD case apart and redo everything, redo them all, leaving 2 free per page, so that now you've got, your expansion again, right? So,
but while you've got that all ripped apart, if someone wants to find a movie, it's going to be very challenging for them to find that.
Yes. That's why classically they lock it, right? Nobody's allowed, that's why classically they lock the table, because, we don't know where this is right now, right? It's in a pile.
Under construction.
Yes,
right?
it's in a pile right now. We don't know where it is.
Bring out the yellow tape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now, I think another reason why there's maybe some confusion or misinterpretation, I don't know, because I think what you're saying is correct, right? I think on the flip side, however, people are going to say, it really affects you. So that lookup affects you when it takes a long time to do those lookups, right? So with the advent of SSD, right, all this premium storage, does that change the game at all?
Well, it helps, right? Because what you're doing now is you're taking what should have been a sequential lookup and turning it into a random lookup. So if you're looking at everything that is, B percent, right, or Batman percent, then you've got a range there, and you should have a sequential lookup, which is going to be very fast, especially by the index, right? But now it's random because they're scattered across all of these different pages and maybe even all these different extents, and you've got these pointers, and it's going to have to go everywhere for it, right? Which SSD does really well. That's a lot less important if you don't have an actual actuator arm moving back and forth trying to access
there. Now
would be if it were in a range, but it is made a lot better. Yes.
Sure. So ultimately, right, the idea of the overall speed of getting your data, right, is the crux of the problem.
Right.
And fragmentation and fill factor, goes into that. I guess there is one more thing we should say about fill factor.
Sure.
And that is the idea of, so we talked about pages, right? So you mentioned leaving a little bit of space there. Now, SQL Server does read everything from memory, right? So I have to be careful. I don't want to leave, and again, I guess I'm thinking about my CD case. There's 4 slots on a page.
Right.
I don't just want to put in one CD or DVD or whatever and leave the other 3 blank, because those are a lot of pages that I'm not using, right? When those pages then go into memory, that basically means I have a lot of blank stuff in memory.
Right.
Right? So I guess there's a trade-off.
So yeah, it's trading one set of complications.
So I guess there's a trade-off.
So yeah, it's trading one set of complications for another, as I like to say about almost everything, right? You're giving up space to gain the speed, right? And to gain concurrency and to gain efficiency in I/O, but you're giving up other resources to make that happen. So yeah.
And I guess on that, what's right really comes down to understanding what are the constraints on your system. And if you're already constrained on memory, you're going to be making it even worse if you need more pages to be loaded to get to the data. But
correct.
If it's one of those things where you've got way more memory on your server than you ever need, that's the unicorn world, I guess.
Yeah.
Then, maybe it's not so much of an issue. And I think that more memory can mitigate the constraints of your disk if your disk is already.
Maybe you'll be lucky in
that. More memory can mitigate the constraints of your disk if your disk is already.
Maybe you'll be lucky and you're on a system that can use BPE or something like that, right? But also,
so I'm not familiar with that acronym, BPE.
Buffer pool extension.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we're using SSDs, like you can extend that beyond your memory capacity. Yeah,
exactly. But I find it also, I'm compelled to say that one mistake a lot of people make is thinking that every table needs to have the exact same fill factor as well. They tend to set that. They tend to set that, and that is propagated by some. I'm going to say that is propagated by some reindexing solutions out there, but certainly not Minion, which is where all of this started to begin with.
Gotcha.
Right, which is what we're doing new in Minion, right? But a lot of the reindexing solutions out there, you'll find both free and that's an actual discussion. But a lot of the reindexing solutions out there, you'll find both free and paid, is that they don't make it very easy at all for different objects to have different settings.
Right. Well, so give us the short version of how you make that determination as to how the fill factor should be different. Right.
So that is unfortunately that's an actual discussion, right? But the short version is, and it also takes some work, right? The short version is that you have to monitor the fragmentation on the table. So you have to have some sort of monitor out there pulling frag stats from the DMV, say on an hourly or a bi-daily or a daily basis, whatever you think your threshold needs to be, right? And then see the rates of fragmentation per day or per hour that these tables are going through. And when they start when they start misbehaving, as in, when performance starts to tank, right? Then you can note the fragmentation level. And if you know that this thing has, say, a fragmentation level of, say, 5% a day, I guess, then you can start with a 90% fill factor and see if that gets you through to your next reindexing, right? Because that's what this is all about, right? Is getting you through to the next big reindexing, right? And doing a little bit every day, even, right?
Right.
I'm not a very big fan of the big reindexing every week. I'm a fan of taking them as they're needed, right? And
a more incremental approach.
Right, but setting the settings to what they need, right? If a table needs to be defragged at 20%, reindexed at 20%, then why make it wait 3 more days for the Saturday night maintenance?
I think that so often people take the approach of, well, we have to reindex everything on a weekly basis. And that's one of those that, I don't always agree with that.
Right.
Sure.
And quite often, and of course, the frag monitor that I just talked about is, if you've got a big shop, it can be overkill, right? Or if you don't have the skill to write something like that, that can be overkill. If you want to take just like the poor man's swag approach, you can set your big table to say 90%. And then, hey, if it misbehaves before the next reindexing, then drop it down to 85, right? Then if it misbehaves before the next reindexing, then drop it down to 80 and keep dropping it by 5% until it makes it to your next reindexing. I mean, and the extra page loads into memory don't have any adverse effects either, right? There's going to be that give and take. I would never recommend it going something like a fill factor of 60 or something, or 50. I think that's a little much for me.
Yeah, that would be a little too much. So now it's interesting because you mentioned, right, so that idea of kind of getting the insights of the fragmentation and then making an adjustment, right? One of the things that I asked when we were going to put this together was, the future of reindexing, and obviously you have the new feature or the new version of the Minionware out, and so one of the things that's interesting that I see, and we've talked about on the show before from a SQL Server in the News perspective, is that SQL Server is starting to put some of the analytics into the database.
Sure.
Right? It's looking at your query plan. It's saying, hey, and we even talked about this with like your table valued functions, right? So like the first time it runs, it doesn't know how many rows it's going to be affected. It's going to guess one, right? It runs and it says, oh, I actually had 1,000. Well, the second time it runs, it's going to reevaluate that plan. I'm expecting 1, I'm expecting 1,000. Do I need to change this at all? And I have a feeling that may impact, right, this idea of how it goes back and gets those records and things, right? Do you think that again, that future, that idea of basically the database deciding what to do and how those plans are going to get generated is going to affect this decision at all?
The decision of what exactly?
Of whether to reindex or, whether like...
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I think in a perfect world, what's going to happen ultimately, and they're nowhere near that right now, right? Is, because right now they can do, they can look at some plan regressions, right? Simple plan regression right now based off of CPU. Mm-hmm. And right now, if it's going to cause a regression of greater than 10 seconds, I think, then you can to force the last known good plan.
Right.
And that's really the only thing you can go by automatically based off of that, or based off of their auto tuning.
Right. So I think that's the next thing that they've added is so there's the auto tuning, right? So basically it says, hey, if my stats have changed and I'm getting some differences, right, then use the old plan.
See, now you're putting something into that I don't think exists. You're making an assumption. It says if the plan is going to regress, not if the stats have changed. It's looking solely at the plan, right?
Solely at the plan.
So it says if the plan is going to take longer than 10 seconds, right? It's going by, I think it's going by CPU, right? If it's right. The CPU is, in fact, let me think, how exactly?
Oh, that's right.
Was it 10 seconds?
The execution of the actual plan, basically.
Right. It's based off the
execution of the actual plan, basically.
Right. It's based off the execution of the actual plan. If it's going to change significantly, I'll say right now, because I don't remember exactly what it is right this second, but it's 10 seconds or 10 milliseconds, something like that. But if it's going to take like 10 seconds longer for the plan to run, then it's going to look for the last known good plan. That's a completely different. You're inserting causality.
What I meant to say was it's looking at the stats of the execution, right? Not the,
I see.
Not the statistics of the. Yeah, so I apologize. So that was unclear.
Okay. Yeah, it's looking at a stat of the execution.
A stat of the execution. Yeah, that's right.
Well, I take that back. There are two conditions that can kick it in, right? It can be kicked in by the plan taking longer and by error count. So if the last error count of the good plan, right, is 1, then it will say that it 1, that the current error count has to be greater than 1. So we're looking at timeouts and stuff like that.
Things like that, right?
So it can be based off of error count as well, and they call that error prone, right? It's just a bit, right? Is this plan error? Is this query error prone?
Right.
Yes. Then use the last known good plan and go on about your business, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I think that in a perfect world, they would have to be able to tell the difference. They would have to know why a query is going bad, right? Why has the plan regressed? And right now, in SQL as an engine, at least not exposed to us, there's no way to tell the difference between a bad query that's bad because the stats are out of whack, or because there's fragmentation, or because there's memory pressure or whatnot, right?
Sure.
There's no place to look to automatically say, oh, well, jack of all trades sort of thing, right? It's a shotgun at this point. That's why so many people quote reindex needlessly, you know.
So on that point, Sean, I mean, one of the things that I think comes up in conversation a lot and people get a little bit confused on when they haven't experienced it is the difference between reindexing, meaning rebuilding or reorging an index, or what statistics are. And can we take a minute to talk about that? Because I think that plays into the whole conversation here.
Absolutely. So rebuilding an index is literally rebuilding the index pages and putting them in the order that they're supposed to be in, right? It's like that whole taking your CD case apart and leaving the 2 slots free on every page and making sure that they're all in order, right? So it's literally completely rewriting those and rearranging all the data so it's completely alphabetized again, if you will, right? Whatever alphabet you're using, right? Whether it's GUID, whatever alphabet you're using, right? Whether it's GUIDs or first names or social security, whatever the hell, right? So it's literally just putting the data back in order and making sure that everything's contiguous again. But your stats is data about that data, right? So let's say that, you've got an alphabetic thing, or no, let's say you have a numeric thing, right? And so the stats would be something like, let's say that the data in your page is the first row is a 1 and the second row is a 5, right? So the stats would say something like this value is 1 and the steps between, and there are 4 steps between this value and the next value. And then if the next one is a 6, then it would say, there's one step between this value and the next value, and so on. If the next value is 10 or 9, it would say, there are 3 steps between this value and the next value. So, right, there are sometimes, where data is going to be located so it can know whether it has to do a scan or a seek, right? Because there are times, I mean, I see this all the time, right, where people say, you want to get rid of all scans, right? You don't want to do scans, you want to do seeks. Nah, not necessarily, right? There are some times when it's actually cheaper to do a scan than it is to do a seek.
Right.
So that's what stats are, is it's data about the data. And where that starts going wrong is if the stats haven't been updated in a while, and say that we'll go back to this first one. Let's say you've got 1, 5, and 6.
Okay.
As a data set. And then you've got between this value and the next value is 4 steps. So you've got 1, 1 and 1, 5, and it says, oh, well, there's 4 steps in between, but but 5 is the very next value. And then you insert 12 more 1s. Well, now your stats are thrown completely off because from that first stats, 1 step. Right. So your data's your metadata about that data is thrown completely off. And then let's say that somebody comes in and deletes that 5 altogether. Well, now you've got 5 listed in the stats, but it doesn't even exist. So it's going to get there, and it's probably going to have to do a scan in order to find it because now the stats are completely gone, right? So when you delete those stats, you're basically clipping SQL's legs out from under it and saying that, I want you to find this data. And by the way, it's none of your business what the data looks like. Right. Just go find it and make it as efficient as possible. And they're like, but I need information. So it's kind of like, and the stats are kind of like a trimmed down index that tells you that tells the engine what the data looks like so it can access it more frequently. So it can access it more efficiently. Right.
Yep.
So,
okay.
And the more the data changes, the more those stats are going to get out of whack because it's kind of like, and the stats are kind of like a trimmed down index that tells you that tells the engine what the data looks like, so it can access it more frequently, so it can access it more efficiently, right?
Yep.
So
okay,
and the
Great.
more the data changes, the more those stats are going to get out of whack, because you're going to have updates, and if somebody comes in and updates that 1 to a 12, and stats are only updated, right, after 500 rows and 20% by default, right? So imagine, having a table with 1 million rows in it or 200,000 rows in it, and trying to join that with another table that's got, say, 40 million rows in it, and your stats are, extremely out of date, and SQL doesn't know anything about it. That's a pretty long lookup time. So,
yep, okay. So then let's say that, I know enough to be dangerous, and I'm going to go and use some built-in maintenance tool out there to go do it. There's a lot of different things that can happen there and how those get rebuilt. But what is it that, because as you talk about your minion reindex, what is it that's really different or stands out that with what you're doing? So
much. And even in version 2, dude, let's not get out of here without me giving you a couple nuggets from version 2, okay? But right now, currently the whole thing is table-based. So all of the settings are table-based. So that makes it really easy to be able to have different settings both at the database level and at the table level without having to have any extra jobs or job steps, right? So it's just an insert into a table. So let's say I want the entire database to have a fill factor of 90. Well, I can set that in the database table. And then let's say I want certain tables in there to have different fill factors, right? So one at 85, one at 80, one at org. Some of them say I want certain tables in there to have different fill factors, right? So one at 85, one at 80, one at 75. Well, I can set those. I can just put in rows in the table, right?
Yep.
And now they've got all their settings, and those settings also extend to every single one of the reindex settings, not just a handful of them, but every single one of them. So some of them can rebuild stats after a reorg. Some of them can be sorted in TempDB. Some of them can use drop existing. Some of them can, have online reindexing. Some of them cannot have online reindexing, and so on, right? So one of the biggest things that we do in that sense is to give you a high level of configurability without any extra jobs or job steps, right? And I think that's the main thing that differentiates us. And we've done what we call, I think we talked about this a long time ago, but the big problem with stats with reindexes on large databases is, let's say you've got a 4-hour window. Well, it can take you an hour and a half to 2 hours, and sometimes longer, just to pull your frag stats.
Right. Yep.
On a big database, it can take a long time, right? You can, in Minion, you can pull those frag stats earlier in the day and use them in your maintenance window. So you could start 2 or 3 hours before your maintenance window starts and pull the frag stats. And then during your maintenance window, you can say, use those stats that I've already collected, and it won't try to pull them again. It'll use them. And now you're using your entire window for actual maintenance instead of using half of it to find out the maintenance you were supposed to do.
Right. Yeah. So that rules-based, almost like a rules-based, chart or list of the settings.
Right. And, something I wasn't very proud of for a while in Reindex 1, in order to do that, that was one of the things that you did have to have a separate job for. So you had to have a job to run the prep only, and then another job to run the actual reindex itself, right? But now we've brought that into the scheduler table. We just released 1.3 6 weeks or 2 months ago, something like that. So we just released 1.3, and we've got that scheduler table now. So now you could say something like, at noon, I want you to run this as a prep only, and then at midnight, I want you to run the reindex as a run prep to job to run that to use the stats that I collected at noon. And now they're just entries in a scheduler table. So now we're back down to having no extra jobs at all. You could run, prep only for 40 different databases at 12 different times. 75 just be table entries. It's all still just one job to actually do the running.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I know if you have a different job for each of those, or even a different job schedule for those different events, it can get really messy in the SQL jobs for the SQL agent.
Right.
We had a client who had over 75 jobs just to manage their reindexes.
Wow.
On a single server. They had a ton of databases, like 3,000 or 5,000 databases on there. And they had 75 something jobs just to manage the reindexes because they had special things that they had to do in there. That was on somebody else's solution.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep. Wow.
Also in 1.3, we gave you the ability to, what do I want to say? We could always do this, but we made it a setting, right? To reindex heaps. So now it is a setting how you want to handle heaps, both at the database and at the table level. So you can just the indexes themselves,
right?
Or you can reindex the heap. You can reindex the heap itself, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting because that's something a lot of people don't think about,
right?
When they're reindexing as well. What's going to happen with the heap?
Right. And like I said, you could always do it, but it followed I don't know if I want to call it the hack attack method. We've always had this way of being able to alter the run. Now, you asked me before, not on film, but the other day when we were talking on Skype, right? You asked me if we were going to be able to do something, if we were going to be able to do, if we had it coming where we were going to be able to limit the reindexes to like page size, to page count or row count, right?
Yep.
That's right. So basically my small indexes I don't care about.
Right, exactly. Now I can actually do that today, right? So, and the way we do that is actually, I'm going to say is actually pretty clever, but it's the way that you had, I'm going to say is actually pretty clever, but it's the way that you had to do the heap reindex before, right? So you'll get the idea. The method to do that now is to do a prep only, right? And that takes all of your information and puts it in a table, right?
Yep.
And then insert a step that deletes rows out of that table based off of any criteria you want.
Oh, so you do the whole prep and then purge anything you don't want.
Right.
And then let it run in the maintenance window and you got it covered.
Exactly. Now, that gives you so many things, right? Yes, you can do it off of index page count. You can do it off of row count. It allows you to reorder the indexes, because that's another thing that that we really do well is we allow you to do your tables in any order you want, right? So you can order the tables. And remember, we were talking before.
Yeah, but I guess I still don't like that idea that I have to be the one to go back and go through there and do it, right? I guess I feel like there should be some minimum
to stop my whole routine. Now, so there's a couple things going on here, right? Oh, I was talking about ordering because we talked about this a long time ago. I remember where I was telling you guys that that's the problem I have with reindex jobs that stop after 2 hours, right? Very seldomly is that actually necessary. What you mean is I'm not able to control the order that the tables go in. And so in order to keep my important tables from running after that 2 hour time window, I have to stop my whole routine. Whereas if I made sure that my 7 or 15 most important tables get done first, then I don't care if those other little piddly tables run over 2 hours. Who cares?
Right.
They don't take long enough and they're not used enough. So, being able to order your tables is a big deal. So within this no man's land, I guess we'll call it purgatory, right? Between the prep only and the actual run,
right?
You can not only delete stuff out of there, but you can also choose, you can reorder. And we've got some SPs that we've written that I don't know where they are, if they've made it to the community zone or if they've made it to the queries folder or what. But we've got some SPs that we've written that help you with this. So you can reorder tables based off of, or you can reorder the tables based off of usage. So you can make sure that the most used tables get done first, or the least used. You can reorder them by schema. You can reorder them by anything that comes up in the stats DMV, right? Or any other criteria you like. And this is kind of where I'm getting at, Carlos, is right now with other solutions. I hate to keep saying that, but that's what it keeps coming back to, right? Currently with other solutions, you get a hard-coded, you can do this with this page count, above this page count, or below this page count. And that's it. That's the only exclusion list. This page count, above this page count, or below this page count. And that's it. That's the only decision you get to make, right? But what if I want to do it based off of like I said, usage, right? What if I want to order them based off of usage? Or what if I want to delete the ones based off of usage or whatnot, right? Anything that gets below a certain usage, don't even bother reindexing it. I just want to just kill that altogether, right? And I don't want to put exclusions in the table because that's an exclusion list I'd have to manage.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So I want it to be more dynamic. So we have a big dynamic component to the way we're doing this. So right now you can go code your own solution, or you can alter one of the solutions that we've already done, and we give it to you in an SP. So you can just pass in a couple of parameters and you're done, right? But in Reindex 2 that I'm working on now, I'm following that exact same method. So what I've been telling my users to do all this time, I'm building into the product. So if you look at it right now, right?
Okay.
Frag stats, and then in the exact same SP, it runs the reindex, right? So frag stats get pulled, then it runs the reindex. Well, that's no different from if I were to do a prep only earlier in the day, and then during the maintenance window, I run the job, right? I run the reindex. Now we're only arguing about the amount of time that happens between the prep and the reindex, right?
Okay.
So in Reindex 2, I'm going to have 2 steps in the job. Well, maybe 3, but we'll talk about that in a second. So the first step is going to do a prep only. Every single time, without fail, even if you're just running the reindex, it's going to do a prep only. The next step runs that prep only. So that's the exact same as pulling the frag stats and running the reindexes. Only I've just now split it up into 2 separate job steps, but one runs right after the other. So you're talking about a difference of milliseconds. It'll run a difference of milliseconds, right?
Yeah.
And so what that's going to allow me to do now is build into the system these inserts, these purgatory inserts, right? So now let's say that you want to limit the run by anything that's only over 500 pages, right? Okay, great. It'll be a checkbox for you, and behind the scenes, after the prep only, it'll run that SP that runs that deletes anything out of there that's under 500 pages. And then let's say that you also want to order it by the most used index. Well, after that, it'll run the one that orders them by most used index. And let's say you only want to do the ones that are in this schema, right? Well, hopefully you would have passed that into the table as a parameter, but you see what I'm doing. So I can anything you want to do the ones that are in this schema, right? Well, hopefully you would have passed that into the table as a parameter, but you see what I'm doing. So I can put in ghosted records. I can do anything I want in that no man's land because the prep is already run. I've got a list of tables and indexes that I'm going to run. And then you can delete, you can add, you can subtract, you can rearrange, you can do anything you want to before that run actually happens.
Yes.
Okay.
So these features you mentioned, is this 1.3 or are we talking about 2 now?
Well, okay, so it's available in 1.3, but you got to code it yourself or get the code that we've written.
Gotcha. Okay. So
in 2.0 that I'm writing right now is where I'm going to build that stuff in, and I'll build in a handful of those purgatory SPs. I'm going to stick with that for now.
Sure.
I'm going to build in a handful of those purgatory SPs, right? And then to build in a mechanism for you guys to write your own and even upload them into the community zone so that everybody can share.
Oh, gotcha.
All right.
Okay.
So you can see the method is going to be much more flexible than anything else you've got now, right? Because you can do more than, index pages or row count. You can do anything that crosses your mind. I mean, even going down to saying, this index, took this long last time and that's too long this time, so I want to delete it, from the thing. And the last thing I want to say about Index 2.0 is a little bit of a teaser. Look for some good multi-threading.
Okay, there we go. Do we have an estimated date yet, or is you still in the works on that?
Oh, I'm still in the works. I wouldn't even come close to having a date, but I am working on it diligently.
Very good.
But I will say that I just got, because one of the problems, remember we were just talking about frag stats and how long it can take to pull.
Right. Oh.
So you're going to be able to say you've got a database that's like 4 terabytes, 6 terabytes, right? You'll be able to pull frag stats as many threads as you want. So I want to split it up, and I want to split the database up into 10 pieces and pull frag stats for, 10 tables at a time.
Very good.
Then you can do that. You can do that in tens and just work through that database, man, and cut your time drastically. I'm seeing beautiful times here. I've got a table with something like 53,000 tables in it on one of my test boxes. And it takes, on my laptop, it takes like 2.5 hours to pull all the stats for it, to pull all the frag stats for it. It gets done in like 12.5 minutes when I strip it out to like 10 threads.
Wow.
It's a beautiful
Very nice.
thing. So look forward to that. And I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, so since you've been on the show a few times before, we thought we'd sort of shake up the SQL family questions a little bit this time.
That's
All right. And I haven't heard any of these, so this is going to be great.
Yeah, that's true.
You were supposed to type them in the chat, and I haven't seen anything, so this is... I like the spontaneity of it. Let's do this.
Do you want to go first, Steve? Or
Yeah, so I guess, you've been around SQL Server quite a while, and you've done a lot with it. And the first question I have is not what would be the one feature you'd change, but what do you think is the most absurd or ridiculous feature that was ever added to SQL Server?
You mean outside of DACPack? It's not the stuff that they add that I think is ridiculous. It's the stuff they don't put in, right? Things that I'm gonna call the half-assed features, right? Things like not, forcing us into dynamic SQL by not allowing us to use, variable names as objects. So like select star from at table.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right. Being able to do stuff like that, or forcing us into XML for everything, and then not standardizing that XML. So, like if you've ever tried to pull, if you've ever tried to parse programmatically a deadlock XML graph, right, and have 14 nodes in one, and then nothing, or 14 attributes in one. And then some of those attributes don't exist, and the other ones, so those attributes don't even exist, right? Not standardizing that XML. Put them there, have them null, but put them there so that they're at least there programmatically for me to parse. We need to be able to do. They force us into ridiculous decisions.
Okay.
Hell, we don't even have thread safety in stored procedures.
Sure. So this is going to take you back a little bit, right? But the first time that you ever failed to close a transaction.
I can tell you the last time. Just the other day, I was like, why the hell is this taking so long? And I went into the DMV, and I was like, now what is blocking this? Why is this blocked? Yeah, that was just last week. So the first time, I really don't know, man. I'm going to tell you honestly, I have always been in the class of what I call dipshit coders. I make so many ridiculous mistakes. I troubleshoot stuff for half a day before I realize I'm troubleshooting on one server. I do that kind of stuff all the time. So when was the first time, dude? Okay. I wouldn't even begin to know.
Okay.
So many times to count.
I guess so it was very public for me, so that's why I guess I guess I'm not talking about the dev server, right? Maybe that's that's something different, right? That first time that you did it, and the manager, the email from the manager comes, so.
I can definitely tell you the first time I brought a cluster down.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Okay. I was working for Pilgrim's Pride, and we had something like 80-something locations all feeding into a central location. And we only had 2 DBAs at corporate office, me and the DBA manager. And I was fairly new to clusters, and I didn't really understand the concept, and I didn't really know what I was doing with clusters. And I went in there and I did something that I shouldn't have done. Went in there with clusters, and I went in there and I did something that I shouldn't have done and brought the cluster down everybody because every site in the entire network fed into ours, right? So transactions across 80 something sites were failing in the middle of in the busiest part of the workday. And I went in to tell the boss what I had just done because I didn't know how to get the cluster back up.
Right.
And just as I walked in there, I says, "Hey, dude, I got to tell you something." And he goes, "Okay, what?" And his phone rang. And he goes, "Can you wait just a minute?" I said, "That's actually for me." And he looked at me and said, "What did you do?" And I was like, "Oh, God. I brought the cluster down. It's down right now." And yeah, that was back when, you had to take, 25 to 45 minutes to spin up all the disks in the array, right?
Right.
So,
Yikes.
yeah, it wasn't a pretty, at least I didn't corrupt anything, but it was not pretty.
Okay.
So we've had your wife Jen on the program here before as well.
Oh my!
And so the family-friendly version of how you two met.
Wow. Okay. That is actually a bittersweet story.
Oh boy. Do we not want to include that one, Sean? We don't have to.
No. There's nothing wrong with it. So we met when I was in my late teens. I was 18 or 19 and she was 13. We met and we were both going to the same youth group.
Oh, okay.
And we became friends because she was fairly introverted and I don't know if I was introverted or not, but I wasn't I wasn't a cool kid, right? And there were some definitely cool kids in our youth group and I wasn't one of them. So we just started kind of hanging out together and we became friends and we were friends, I don't know, 20 years, I think, before we actually got together as a couple.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, late blossomed.
Yeah.
Well, they're good. All's well that ends well. So.
And in that, which of you was the first one to dive into SQL Server?
Me. Yeah, I definitely
even with the chef thing.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I quit cooking and I had my own catering company even after I left my chef, who I apprenticed under for so many years. I had my own catering company for a few years, even after I was in IT.
Gotcha.
And so I got her involved in SQL. I don't know how long I was in it before I got her involved, but she was an intern at FedEx at the time. And I started talking to her about SQL and then, because she was, I guess, dissatisfied with the way her current position was going.
Sure.
Her probably just to please her man.
Well, that wraps up my SQL family questions for today.
Well, that's right. Thanks, Sean, for being on the program. We do appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. I love talking shop.
Yeah, and as usual, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So never a dull moment with Sean, as always. And thanks again to him for coming on the program today.
Yes, always good to learn from him. I know it's interesting because he's a bright guy and he has a lot of information there that's not always apparent.
That's right.
I know when we were at Past Summit, I actually sat in on a presentation that he did on using regex in Management Studio.
Oh, right.
And I sat down in the front row, and before it started, he made a comment to me about, "Oh, what are you doing here? You should know this." And I thought, well, yeah, I should know this, but that's why I'm here.
That's right. That idea. We all have something we can share. And yeah, so I think, again, the understandings of the basics, maybe, you don't have to, that can all of the components of indexes, like, and build the tool, like the Minionware stuff. But that ability to at least understand how things work, I think it's very similar to the idea of the mechanic, right? I don't know that I can't fix everything in my car, but I at least have an understanding of what the big components are and how they all work together. And the same kind of applies to index maintenance. And I think that can serve you, really well in the long term, for overall health of your system.
Yeah, and I know the way you say long term there, I think that the index maintenance, although there's been some variations with new features and things over time, but that's one of those fundamentals that it hasn't changed significantly. I mean, some of the approaches have changed because we have faster storage or more memory than we used to, but the fundamentals haven't really changed that much. And if you get good at index maintenance, it's something that's probably going to go a long way into the future for you.
That's right. And I think, one of the important things that I'm not sure that we stressed in the interview, itself is just that, again, we're very keen, or those who aren't architecting that the speed of that an index can solve, particularly for a specific query, it's very, very appealing to want to go ahead and throw that index in. But as we know, there's no free lunch, right?
Right.
And so with that, they need care and feeding, and obviously we've talked about some ways of how to address that. So,
yep.
Well, awesome. I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you have other ideas that you want us to be talking about on the podcast, you can leave them at sqldatapartners.com/podcast. And again, we'll ask you to leave your thoughts or start thinking about your tips and tricks and what you want to submit there. You can always connect with us on social media. I'm on LinkedIn at Carlos L. Chacon.
And SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners. Data Partners.